Since the very beginning of the North Korean troops' involvement in the Russo-Ukrainian war, the reports have been grim. Dog meat for rations, barely any training, and sent straight to die on the front lines. Russia's treatment of these soldiers has been nothing short of monstrous. But now the horror has taken an even darker, more revolting turn. Even in death, these soldiers can't escape Russia's cruelty. Their mutilated bodies are now being burned beyond recognition, faces melted off, identities erased. But what could possibly drive a regime to such barbarity? Watch this video to find out. Unfortunately, there's no exaggeration here. The atrocities we're discussing aren't just rumors or overblown claims. They're confirmed by none other than the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy himself. In a post shared on X, formerly Twitter, on December 16, 2024, Zelenskyy revealed, "Russians are trying to literally burn the faces of North Korean soldiers killed in battle." But this revelation wasn't just a statement, it came with proof. A chilling 31-second video shared on Zelenskyy's official X account and Telegram channel shows exactly what he described. At the 24-second mark, you can see a group of people burning what appears to be a corpse on a snow-covered slope. The subtitles spell it out. Russians trying to conceal the faces of North Korean soldiers even after their death. The footage reportedly depicts the aftermath of battles in Russia's Kursk region. But as undeniable as these horrors seem, the sheer brutality makes them almost surreal. Russia's campaign of destruction has produced countless reports of atrocities, but even when evidence is captured on video, it can feel like a nightmare too grotesque to be real. And this nightmare begs the question, why? Why are North Korean soldiers already pawns in this cynical war, having even their deaths erased in the most gruesome ways imaginable? The answer lies in cold, calculated pragmatism. Russia is desperate to conceal the very presence of North Korean troops in this war. Officially, neither Moscow nor Pyongyang has admitted to their deployment, though both made vague statements defending their right to military cooperation. But despite these desperate and gruesome attempts, the facts are undeniable. Ukrainian intelligence and international observers have confirmed that at least 10,000 North Korean soldiers have been sent to fight in Russia's war, making their presence the largest known involvement in this conflict of a nation not directly impacted. The reason for this secrecy is clear. This alliance is deeply embarrassing for Russia. It's an admission that their own manpower is insufficient to sustain the war effort, forcing the country to rely on one of the most isolated and repressive regimes in the world. By burning the bodies of the fallen North Korean soldiers, Russia might be hoping to obliterate any proof of their participation before it leaks out further. A second potential explanation for this grisly act is an attempt to cover up the massive losses the North Korean troops have suffered. These troops have been brought in to supplement the Russian ranks, which have suffered a mind-boggling 777,720 losses from February 24, 2022 to December 24, 2024, according to the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces. Now the North Korean troops are also dropping like flies, Russia's President Vladimir Putin is desperate to prevent the world from knowing the true cost of his reliance on foreign fighters. The North Korean troops have reportedly suffered catastrophic losses on the battlefield. Since entering combat in early December, at least 1,000 of these troops have been injured and hundreds more killed. Zelenskyy puts the toll even higher at more than 3,000 killed or wounded, and the reports from the battlefield paint a shocking picture of how these numbers have skyrocketed in just a matter of weeks. The first reported numbers were relatively small compared to current estimates. For instance, 30 North Korean soldiers were killed or wounded in clashes near the villages of Plakovo, Vorozhba, and Martinovka over a single weekend, according to Ukraine's defense intelligence. Ukrainian special forces reported similar numbers, 50 North Korean troops killed and 47 wounded in 3 days. But it shouldn't be surprising that the casualties have piled up alarmingly fast in Kursk, where North Korean units have been fighting alongside Russian forces. The tactics used by North Korean units are mostly to blame for these massive losses. You see, witnesses report that these troops launched infantry attacks reminiscent of the Korean War, with waves of soldiers advancing in outdated formations. Ukrainian units, well armed with drones and modern weaponry, have taken full advantage of these vulnerabilities. For example, the Faust unit of Ukraine's special forces reported neutralizing 33 North Korean soldiers with light drones, noting that the soldiers tried to shoot back at the drones or run. Apparently, they have adopted the Russian tactic of freezing in place once one appears. Even intercepted communications have highlighted the shocking scale of North Korean losses. In one call, released by Ukraine's security service, the SBU, a nurse in a Moscow hospital described trainloads of wounded North Korean soldiers arriving from Kursk, 200 in just 2 days. The nurse revealed that the hospital wards were being cleared specifically for these troops, with staff struggling to communicate due to language barriers and strict prohibitions on speaking English with them. She bitterly questioned their supposed status. Are they elite or what, these Koreans? Clearly, even those tasked with treating the wounded are left bewildered by their sudden influx. The deployment of North Korean troops was meant to strengthen the Russian ranks, but instead it's become another logistical and political disaster. Acknowledging these losses would reveal the growing desperation of Putin's war effort. So instead of honoring these soldiers, he has their bodies mutilated and burnt. This brutal cover-up sends a clear message. Russia values its narrative of strength more than the lives of its so-called allies. For the North Korean soldiers, even death is another stage in their exploitation. And for their families back in North Korea, well, they may never know the truth of what happened to their sons, brothers, or fathers. Instead, they'll be left with vague, state-approved lies, while the world bears witness to the real horrors inflicted on these soldiers. However, given the recently published report by the New York Times, it's safe to assume that Putin isn't trying to hide the North Korean losses from Kim Jong-un, the country's supreme leader. You see, initially Western analysts assumed this unusual alliance between Putin and Kim was Moscow's last-ditch effort to fill the Russian ranks. But as it turns out, the deployment of North Korean soldiers to Russia wasn't Putin's idea after all. US intelligence sources now believe that it was Pyongyang, not Moscow, that proposed the idea of sending North Korean troops to fight in Ukraine. Of course, Putin, ever eager to bolster his faltering war effort, jumped at the chance to accept Kim's offer. Since August 2024, an estimated 10,000 to 12,000 North Korean troops have been sent to the Kursk Oblast, embedding with Russian units in one of the bloodiest theaters of the conflict. But for Kim, sending his soldiers to die isn't a tragedy, it's a transaction. According to US officials, Kim isn't expecting immediate payment. He's playing the long game, banking on future Russian support in diplomatic disputes, crises, and crucially, access to military technology. This cold calculus might also explain why the soldiers being sent to Russia are reportedly not North Korea's best. These troops are poorly equipped, poorly trained, and poorly regarded. Kim likely hand-picked those he deemed most disposable. He always knew their fate. He knew they'd face slaughter on the battlefield. He just didn't care. The truth is, Kim doesn't need to see the burned faces of these soldiers to know they're suffering. He enabled it, and now he's profiting from it. As for Putin, he's not much different. While Kim is playing the long game, Putin is focusing on one thing: survival. And hiding the truth about the North Korean troops is essential in his quest. The world simply can't be allowed to see how desperate he has become. That's why burning the faces of the slain North Korean soldiers is just the latest tactic the Russian forces have used, though it's also the most gruesome by far. In reality, Russia has gone to extreme lengths to hide the identity of the North Korean soldiers and keep their presence in Russia under wraps. This started with their training in Russia. According to Zelenskyy, North Korean soldiers were even prohibited from showing their faces during training. The Russians tried to erase any video evidence of their presence. That's right, as soon as these troops arrived in Russia, every effort was made to remove any trace of their identity. But it didn't stop there. These soldiers were also given fake military documents with Russian names and birthplaces, as recently revealed by Ukraine's Special Operations Forces. When these forces seized documents from slain soldiers, they found military IDs that were nearly blank. There weren't any stamps or photos. However, the names were given in the Russian manner, and the Republic of Tuva, a Russian republic in southern Siberia, was marked as their place of birth, yet the signatures were in Korean, revealing the deception. In another effort to disguise their identity, North Korean troops were faced to pose as indigenous peoples from Russia's Far East, particularly Buryats. According to Ukraine's military, these soldiers were embedded in Russian units and disguised as locals from the region. They were also provided with documents, trained at Russian military centers, and eventually fully integrated into Russian forces. Of course, none of these tactics helped the Kremlin much, as the Ukrainian, South Korean, and US intelligence quickly uncovered the truth. However, this didn't stop Putin from continuing his ridiculous efforts. That's why Ukraine's Defense Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense, the GUR, reported on December 14th that Russia has implemented strict counterintelligence measures to protect its secret. In areas where North Koreans were deployed, Russian soldiers had to go through special checks. Russia's Federal Security Service, FSB, would also seize phones and other devices to ensure no information was leaked. Their presence was often hidden even from other Russian forces. And these are just the tactics used while the North Korean soldiers are still alive. After their death, Russia relies on a few tactics to prevent their deaths from becoming public knowledge. According to Ukraine's National Security Council, the bodies of slain soldiers are often lined up, hidden from view and taken away by tracked vehicles before any information can be gathered. While awaiting this grim transport, the bodies are covered, their identities erased. The drone footage shared by Ukraine's Marine Corps unit Birds of Magyar is particularly haunting. Rows of corpses, faces concealed, lie frozen in the snow after being lined up by 4 to 5 Koreans arriving on buggies. These mangled carcasses, as the unit refers to them, are a chilling testament to Russia's obsession with keeping the North Korean involvement and death a secret. But this brings us to another question. Why have there been so many North Korean deaths in Russia recently? Well, this devastating loss of life isn't a result of a singular cause. Rather, it reflects a combination of factors that have left the North Korean soldiers unprepared and vulnerable. It's a deadly cocktail of poor training, inadequate equipment, and physical unpreparedness. And of course, we mustn't forget the massive language barrier between the Russians Russians and the North Koreans. Let's have a brief overview of each of these factors. As things stand, North Korean soldiers simply aren't equipped for modern combat. As Ukraine's military and analysts from around the world have pointed out, these troops aren't trained for the type of warfare that's being waged in Ukraine. They have not trained enough for drone and trench warfare, said Do Jin Ho, a senior analyst at the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses. North Korean special forces are primarily trained for sniper missions, urban warfare, and mountain infiltration, skills that are ill-suited for the open, flat terrain of the Ukraine-Russia front lines. The shift from mountain skirmishes to open-field combat in a war dominated by aerial surveillance and drone strikes has proven disastrous for these poorly equipped soldiers. To make matters worse, these soldiers are also poorly trained, both by North Korea and Russia. Reports from South Korean intelligence sources reveal that many of the soldiers received only rudimentary training before being thrown into combat. It certainly doesn't help that North Korean soldiers lack any real-world combat experience. According to Ahn Chan-il, a former North Korean army sergeant, from top to bottom, the North Korean military has had no live combat experiences for decades. This absence of real-world combat exposure left these soldiers ill-prepared for the brutality of the war in Ukraine. Ill-prepared is also the perfect way to describe the physical condition of most of these North Korean troops. You see, North Korea might be one of the world's most militarized nations, with an army of over 1.3 million active personnel, but the reality of life in the military is far from ideal. Kim Song-han, a defector from North Korea, recalled the extreme malnutrition he and his comrades experienced during their service. There was little food, poor treatment, and grueling winter marches with no sleep, Kim said. Even today, the North Korean military is still plagued by food shortages, and many soldiers suffer from parasitic infections due to the lack of medical treatment. One defector was even found with parasitic worms as long as 10.6 inches, a harrowing representation of the complete disregard for the soldiers' well-being. But even if the soldiers who arrived in Russia were skilled, experienced, and physically prepared, they would still struggle on the battlefield. Why? Well, it's simple really. They can't understand what's going on. South Korean lawmakers revealed that the North Korean soldiers were taught about 100 basic military terms in Russian, but this crash course is far from enough, especially in the heat of battle. According to the GUR, the language barrier remains a difficult obstacle to management and coordination. The inability to properly communicate not only affects coordination during battle, but also increases the chances of deadly mistakes, such as friendly fire incidents. In one such incident, North Korean soldiers mistakenly opened fire on Chechen troops from the Akhmat battalions fighting alongside the Russian forces, killing 8 men. All things considered, the North Korean soldiers sent to Russia are simply faced with impossible odds. Lacking proper training, communication skills, and physical resilience, they're being used as cannon fodder by both the Russian and North Korean regimes, and after they die, as expected, they're now defaced and stripped of their identities. They aren't even allowed the dignity of being remembered as individuals. Seeing the horrors committed by the Russian forces against their North Korean comrades, Ukraine decided to use them to its advantage. Kyiv is now focusing on one thing: convincing these soldiers to desert and join the Ukrainian side. The logic is simple and explained by Zelenskyy. There's no reason for Koreans to fight and die for Putin, and even after their deaths, Russia will only mock them, the Ukrainian president said. Ukraine is trying to show these soldiers that their best chance for survival and a better life lies in defection. In fact, this was Kyiv's goal even before the gruesome reports about mutilating North Korean corpses started to come out. Previous reports revealed that the Ukrainian intelligence services were deploying leaflets via drones and projectiles, and even creating videos urging soldiers to desert. Vitaly Matvienko, a spokesperson for the I Want to Live project, explained that not all North Korean soldiers are eager to fight. He said, "We know very well the living conditions in North Korea. Therefore, many see it as a chance to escape the regime and go to another country. However, most of them would only get to die in that other country." That's why leaflets dropped from the drones deliver a clear message. Kim Il-sung didn't want North Korean soldiers to fight for Russian imperialists. The leaflets also included step-by-step instructions on how to surrender, promising guarantees and benefits for those who choose to give up their arms. In a video shared to Ukraine's Telegram channel, a North Korean volunteer in the Ukrainian forces urged his countrymen to defect. The text accompanying the video said that those who do will be free from the Big Brother who watches over all the inhabitants of North Korea, and even called not taking this unique opportunity a sin. Considering the fate of many of the North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia, this description seems rather accurate. However, this still doesn't guarantee Ukraine's efforts will be successful. You see, in North Korea, loyalty to the regime is paramount, and military service is a reflection of that devotion. The soldiers in North Korean elite units, who are held in high esteem within the country's military, aren't just chosen for their physical abilities, but also for their family's loyalty to the state. Defecting, even in Russia, would be viewed as an unforgivable betrayal, especially given the brutal indoctrination that permeates every aspect of their lives. In some cases, North Korean soldiers are even trained to commit suicide rather than be captured, with the belief that this would ensure their families are cared for and they are remembered as heroes. This mindset, coupled with the regime's regime's tight control over soldiers' families means defection is not a simple choice. Instead, it's a challenge to everything they've been taught to value, even if it means facing death on the battlefield and mutilation after death. But what do you think about these horrifying reports? Do they surprise you at all, or have you come to expect only the most extreme measures from both regimes involved? Also, how far will Moscow go in its efforts to conceal the truth, even though the truth is very much out there? And finally, after the mutilation of his own soldiers, do you think Kim will continue to send more to their deaths in Russia, or will the mounting casualties and global outrage finally force him to reconsider? Share your thoughts in the comments section below.